Let's look at birds. Birds are called aves. It's traditionally given the rank of class aves, but it's generally now it's the way we've reorganized the ranks. I'm not putting them up there. So class aves, that works. It's usually a superorder or subclass now in other classification systems. So the key thing is it's a type of reptile. And this is up for Wednesday. There's our dinosaurs. And just to review, dinosaurs break down into ornithischians and saurischians. Saurischians break down into sauropods, which are the big giants, and theropods, which are the scary carnivores. And the only surviving member of the whole Dinosauria is a group of theropods that we call birds. So that's where we are. So there's our amniote evolutionary tree for living things. And it's always, again, worthwhile to point out that birds are more closely related to crocodilians than they are to any of the other reptiles, either of them. They're off on their own here. So birds are reptiles. I said that enough times, I don't think I can say it ever again, but we used to have to emphasize it because people were very uncomfortable with it. I don't want a Java update. So, there's evolutionary tree with time on it. Paleozoic, Mesozoic, Cenozoic. There's our birds right there. And if we bring them out, like any of these groups, there's all sorts of different kinds. If we rank as class aves, and this, but we'll go because it's the easiest. Class aves, there's a bunch of different orders. Remember, class, order, family. And we'll look at some of these orders towards the end of our bird discussion, but I don't want to get to them yet. All right. So, I like that picture. Here's our living archosaurs. And there's all that extinct archosaurs. We're done with these guys. So, when you look at birds, we're going to come back to this again and again and again. When you look at birds, flight explains a lot. They're extremely specialized. And almost, when you look at their anatomy, their physiology, almost any aspect of their biology, that bit of biology has been jerked around or modified to make flight possible. Compare, the anatomy of a bird to a lizard or a crocodile. The way birds are different is almost always about flight. And we'll come back to that again and again. It's the main force isn't the right word. Main factor in their evolution is better flying. Birds are endothermic, warm-blooded. It's the only other truly warm-blooded group of animals we play with, mammals and birds. The diversity count of living species is 9 to 10,000. That's the number I keep picking up. That's more birds than mammals, more than other reptiles, not as many as fishes, probably 25,000 species of fishes. That's a big group, but not a huge group. And it's a diverse group. There's lots of different ways to be a bird. And we'll hit on some of this as we go through this. Birds are extremely well studied compared to any other group of animals or plants you want to look at. Birds are probably the best known. And there's reasons for that. They're very charismatic. And scientists, a lot of scientists work on birds as a group, a lot of scientists focus on. But we also have an enormous number of highly skilled, competent amateurs studying birds. And so they draw an awful lot of attention, and they're very, very well known. More so than any other group we're going to look at. I bet many of you have a bird field guide. And as such, we have millions and millions of amateur ornithologists worldwide. I keep bringing out new batteries. Every time I clear out batteries. Unlike most other groups we've looked at, scientists don't often discover new birds. These are a couple new birds. Whereas, hundreds and hundreds of new fishes are discovered each year. Probably hundreds of reptiles and amphibians, thousands and thousands of insects are discovered each year. It's 2 or 3 birds a decade, new birds. And look where they're coming from. The rainforests of Central Africa, or or remote parts of India. This is a group of organisms we know really, really well. You know I like biggest and smallest. This is the smallest living bird. It's a hummingbird, and it's from the island of Cuba. And that doesn't give you much perspective on it, but maybe this does. It's this big. It's like a bee. It's amazing. And it's endangered. That's the biggest bird that made it into human history, human times. It's extinct now. But it lived on the island of Madagascar, that big island off the east coast of Africa. And when humans arrived there, they hunted it to extinction, maybe 1,000 years ago or more. So, other superlatives about birds. Fastest living animal is a bird. The peregrine falcon can dive at speeds of 240 miles an hour. They hunt birds primarily. They dive down on another bird that's flying and whack it and kill it when they kill it on impact with their feet. Just consider 240 miles an hour. That's faster than Indy car goes. And the control systems in their brain, the sensory input they need to process in order to fly like that. Other superlatives, this is a term, we'll come back to migrations. This one impresses the heck out of me. This bird enjoys tundra so much. It spends part of the year in Arctic tundra and then flies all the way across the planet to enjoy the tundra in the southern hemisphere and then back again on these enormous migratory routes. So birds come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. This is what I remember seeing when I was in grad school in a museum collection. A specimen, a prepared specimen. I thought, oh, is that from Costa Rica? Is that from Africa? Where is that? This is from the Midwest, the Great Plains, the grasslands of North America. But there's lots of diversity out there. And there you go. Here's a basic bird. When we look at a bird again, we're seeing a creature that, in our slice through evolutionary history, it's modified exquisitely for flight and flying and then doing all the things it needs to do, feeding, reproducing, living, based on that basic anatomy, flying. So there's the relatives. We've touched upon this a whole lot. We've got theropod dinosaurs. We've got archosaurs. Those are the relatives. That's the evolutionary foundation for birds. So we take, this kind of anatomy, this kind of physiology, this kind of biology, and it gets jerked around into this. So there's an awful lot of specialized anatomy and physiology we have to look at. And birds are a good place to look at that. We can look at physiology and details of anatomy in any group. But birds are a good place to look at it because it's so different than a mammal operates in many ways. And it's all, again, about flying. So, real quick, we'll look at bird origins. We did this Monday when we talked about dinosaurs. We kind of derived birds, but I want to walk through that quickly again to get it back in our brain. And like I said, sometimes there's like 2 weeks between what I'm doing now and what I just did Monday because this is summer. But remember, here's birds on our evolutionary tree. Here's the dinosaurs. And there they are, the theropod dinosaurs on our evolutionary tree there. And if we look just at theropods, we can zoom that up. There they are. There. We looked at some of these guys last time. We're not worried about them today, but there they are. So, I keep saying the same thing over and over again. Birds are dinosaurs, theropods. Okay. As we talked about last time, feathers show up in the theropod dinosaurs. And a lot of these dinosaurs were probably feathered. They weren't birds, but they were feathered dinosaurs. And that's an idea of the last 30 years. I always use this as an example. Tyrannosaurus rex was almost certainly feathered. That's our traditional view of T-Rex. It probably was fuzzy. And if we look at the evolutionary tree for Tyrannosaurus rex, here's the evolutionary tree for theropods. There's Tyrannosaurus rex. And all these little things that represent dinosaurs or other things that have been confirmed to have feathers. So we see feathers all over this evolutionary tree. They just haven't been confirmed with T-Rex yet, but it probably was. It's just we have to reconceptualize the creature. So there's the raw material, and there's the background, the history of the ancient relatives of birds, the theropods, the non-avian theropods. And here's birds here, right here. And here's these. And we walked through these last time. I just want to hit them real quickly again to get us thinking about where birds come from. Remember, in the theropods, there are three kinds of theropods. Slow movers, the fast-moving graspers, the hind claw slashers. We have three types of dinosaurs there. Theropods. And there they are. And they're leading towards bird. Well, I always say that the wrong way to put evolutionary. They're not leading towards anything. But birds are where we're, I used to say birds are where we're headed. That's not right either. Well, they're there. The slow-moving ones. These were big carnivores, bipedal animals. They may have gone warm-blooded and been feathered. We don't confirm that for all of them yet. That's the ancient background. These things give way to fast-moving graspers. These are smaller creatures, and almost certainly warm-blooded, and feathers are confirmed in these guys. They're chasing prey and grabbing it. And we see lots of modifications to the forelimbs for grabbing and catching. Sinosauropteryx is a really good example of this little running predator. Active, agile, probably warm-blooded. And these guys had feathers of a sort. They were fuzzy. The fuzz is probably to conserve heat. And that's just a great picture. Once we have feathers, we're conserving heat. It's a good sign we're warm-blooded. Also, feathers could be for display. They could have had roles in capturing prey as well. We're not flying with them yet. The third group that leads to birds are the hind claw slashers. And these guys have this big claw on their hind leg for kicking. Again, they're running around catching prey. And we bring together in these guys a bunch of adaptations that allow flight. And among those adaptations is a wrist modification. We talked about this last time. The wrist, one of the carpal bones in the wrist is modified so that the wrist can make this circular motion. It's probably about grabbing prey. But when we get to flying, that's a really important motion for the wing when we're flying. So it's a pre-adaptation. And we have the wishbone, the furcula, which is a bone that goes deeper down in evolution, but it becomes like a spring. As you're moving those arms around, it pushes them back out. Classic hind claw slashers of Velociraptor. All right. So there we go. Let's focus on the birds now. Origin of birds. This is kind of a neat little sequence there, going to a blue jay. Aves. The defining trait here, as we touched upon last time, but now we're focusing on birds here. Last time we stopped right here at the extinct things. Asymmetrical feathers. Asymmetrical feathers. This is a symmetrical feather. Both sides of the vane are equal. This is an asymmetrical feather. This is a flake feather. And we can talk about, I hope I get to the, I need to get this day, I'll never finish this class. Never finish mammals. This kind of feather, when you flap your wings, you can get lift that way, but it has to be this kind of feather. We'll see why in a little while. So the earliest thing we see with asymmetrical feathers is this ancient bird Archaeopteryx. This is the first bird we know about and has beautifully preserved arms with feathers. We don't call those arms anymore, we'll start calling them wings. And that's a reconstruction of Archaeopteryx. Okay. And I think that's a remarkable fossil. That's an Archaeopteryx feather. And these are modern bird asymmetrical feathers. Look, the vane is very narrow here, very broad here. Okay. So again, there's various hypotheses about how flying started. There's two main hypotheses. Ancestors are important. The niche of the ancestor, the animal that wasn't flying yet was running and chasing prey, jumping and climbing. Had that wishbone, the furcula, which is like a spring again. When the arms are brought down, that bone pushes them back out. It's like a spring, like a leaf spring in your car. And that semilunar carpal lets the wing move or the hand move like this. So, kind of a neat sequence here. Theropod dinosaur, theropod dinosaur, theropod dinosaur to bird in here. So, a hand that's for grasping, a hand that's about supporting feathers for flight. Other important pre-adaptations are warm-bloodedness. That's powerful metabolism. You can process a lot of energy. And feathers are really lightweight, and they let us form flight surfaces that aren't heavy. They probably evolved for conserving heat. They get repurposed into flight surfaces. The two hypotheses, we talked about these last time, so I'll just click through these quickly today. The two hypotheses are the cursorial predator. That cursorial means running. The idea is that these agile, rapid predators were running after prey, and they had long feathers on their arms, maybe for displays, maybe to catch things like a net. But they had these long feathers there, and when they jump off a log or off a bank into an arroyo, if their arms were out, they would catch some air, and they would glide. And that's the beginning of flight. It starts with gliding. And we have a cursorial predator today in the birds, and that's the roadrunner. Classic. This is the niche that we're thinking. So that's it in a nutshell. You start from gliding. This is called the ground-up hypothesis. The other hypothesis, the arboreal hypothesis, this is the tree-down hypothesis. This hypothesis suggests that these early birds, the proto-birds, were climbing around in trees looking for prey and jumped. And again, long feathers on their arms for display, or maybe for knocking things out of the air like a bat does, where they're catching air with those and starting to glide. So again, flying starts with gliding. Something like that. Goofy things jumping out of trees. Something like that. I don't know which hypothesis has more support these days. I'm not up on that. But that's the tree-down hypothesis. And this is another interesting fossil, a fossil theropod, where one of his fingers is enormously long and thought to have been about, well, he's showing you there, digging grubs out of tree trunks. Yeah.
I'm sorry, did you say flight starts with
gliding?
Gliding.
Yeah. Okay. And there's a modern glider. Second time I've done that. Okay. This is just a reconstruction of a very early bird, Balor. So, let's look at birds. We've gotten here. Let's have a look. Once we're flying, now that lineage is established, and Archaeopteryx represents that early bird, and there's one there. Once we're flying, natural selection is going to come at those populations and make them better and better and better at it. And that leads us to modern birds. And that's the diversity of modern birds, and we'll play with this maybe Monday. So, here's Aves. Aves is modern birds plus a few fossil things. And again, the defining trait is asymmetrical feathers. Asymmetrical feathers defines you as a bird, and that means you were flying. Flying by flapping your wings, not just jumping and gliding, but flying. And Archaeopteryx joins the club. So, we're done with Archaeopteryx. The modern birds are called Neornithes. That means new birds. Ornithes is bird, neo, new birds. We'll just call them modern birds. And these are all the living birds. And I'm sure there's some fossil ones too, but we're not going to worry about that. Here's the traits of modern birds. So the ancestor of modern birds invents these things. And let's have a quick look at that. And you see we have two groups of modern birds. Big groups. One is an alula. And we'll come back and talk about this when we talk about the mechanics of flight. But these are the alulae. And they're for aerodynamics. They structure the flow of air over the wing in a very efficient way. And that defines a modern bird. One of the traits, alula. We'll come back to that, talk about how it works in a little while. The other thing is a sternum with a keel. Get the bird skeletons out one of these days and have a look at them. The sternum, this is your sternum, has a big broad keel on it, and that's for those flight muscles to attach to. We have a keeled sternum. There's no tail in birds, no bony tail. And the caudal vertebrae, the tail vertebrae, are all bunched together and fused in a little stub called a pygostyle. That's a bird thing. No tail, no bony tail. A lot of this is about weight saving, right? The pelvis, the pelvic girdle, and the pelvic vertebrae are fused together in one unit called a synsacrum. Sacrum, that suggests pelvis to you, right? Sacral. And syn means joined. The vertebrae are joined to the pelvis in a rigid construction. And there's a nice view of a bird skeleton. There's the pygostyle, the little bony tail, very, very short. And there's the synsacrum right there. No teeth. No living bird has teeth. Teeth are heavy. Let's do away with them. So look at Archaeopteryx. It's a bird, but it's not a new bird, not a modern bird. It has teeth. It has a tail. It doesn't have a synsacrum. It doesn't have a keel. And I'm not sure about the alula part, but obviously I think it does, and I'm not sure what the fossils tell us. But without the feathers, that's just a theropod dinosaur. So, that's a word I told you I'd never use again. Clade. Clade means groups. There's two groups of living birds. There's old-fashioned group and the newer group. And look at the names here. Paleognathus, Neognathus. Paleo means old, right? Neo means new. Gnathos means jaws. New jaws, or old jaws, new jaws. That's what those words mean. And the details are not important to us. What it is this is the palate, the roof of the mouth. Okay? In a Paleognathos bird, the roof of the mouth looks like that of an alligator. Old-fashioned archosaur mouth. All right? That's what Paleognathus means. And the Neognathus birds, the modern birds, the palate gets modified, lightened, and it's in the new form, the Neognath form, new jaws. Jaws isn't quite what we're talking about here, but we're talking about the roof of the mouth. So old-fashioned, kind of alligator version, dinosaur version, newfangled bird version. And those are details. The finer details that are not necessary, are not needed here. So who are the paleognaths? Who are the old-fashioned birds, the primitive birds? They're primitive and they're mostly flightless. And flight evolved before these birds. These are birds, their ancestors said, we don't need to fly. So don't let you think these are on their way to flying. Their ancestors flew. They just choose not to. So we have things like ostriches and rheas. Also some of the big birds we still have with us. Actually, I think all the really big birds are in this crowd. Other things you might have heard of. This is a kiwi, that funny little bird from New Zealand.
Yeah.
And this is an Australian bird called I can't remember what it's called. So these are the primitive birds. Think ostrich, if you want a good example. Think kiwi. And I was looking for pictures of kiwi. How cute is that? That's a baby kiwi. Doesn't look like a bird, barely looks like a bird. And again, we've seen this before. What we're going to see, we've seen before. We're going to see it again when we get to mammals. Australia and New Zealand hang on to all this cool primitive stuff. So the modern birds are just about everything else. Everything else. It's everything you think of when you think of a bird. These are the neognates or the modern birds. It's just that's where almost all the diversity is. And they tend to fly, although we have loss of flight in a number of these groups as well. Flying is not the important trait here. Let's look at feather. Let's look at some of the anatomical functional details of birds, and let's start with feathers. If you have feathers, you are a bird. Let me start over. If you're a living animal and you have feathers, you are a bird. And only birds have feathers. But remember, we think feathers evolved deep down here in the theropods. It's a defining trait of living birds. Of living animals, only birds have feathers. They're made of keratin, same stuff your hair is made of, same stuff your fingernails are made of. So when you burn feathers, you get that horrible protein burning smell. Hair and feathers, same material. Your basic feather, and this is just a basic flight feather. Again, Dr. Alvarado teaches ornithology, and you can do a whole semester on this. You can probably do a whole day on feathers. We're going to do 5 slides on them. But feather structure, it has a shaft, and the finer, thinner part to either side is called the veins. And what's important here, particularly on a flight feather, is how the vein is put together. And we're going to zoom in right there. If you zoom in, you notice that coming off the shaft are what are called barbs. These are fine little filaments of keratin. And then coming off the barbs, in turn, are barbules. And they're covered with little hooks. I'm going to call them hooks. They apparently are called hamuli. Let's just call them hooks. And they mesh with each other. So we get a nice, flat, consistent, but very lightweight surface. And you kind of know that. If you take a feather and you pull your finger across it in the wrong way, you tear it up. If you're careful, you can probably put it back together. And that's breaking these little connections and then putting back together. They're kind of like, Velcro's not the right thing, but the barbules of adjacent barbs kind of grab onto each other. And you watch birds, like particularly aquatic birds or birds in a tree, they spend a lot of time doing this. That's repairing this. Or if they get out of alignment, they have to put them back into alignment. Unlike a mammal, which is completely covered with fur, feathers are laid down in tracts, and these tracts are called terulae. And ter, again, is the Greek word for wing. And they have different names. We're certainly not worried about them at this level, but you can see the dorsal region, interscapular region. The feathers, again, are not everywhere. And this little baby bird shows them really nicely, poor little guy. But you can see there's a lot of bare skin because the feathers are only in certain places. Baby birds are really ugly. So there's a bunch of different functions. And I just made a small list here of some of the major types here. Contour feathers. Contour feathers are feathers that smooth out the animal's body. Remember, this is an archosaur in there. Let's go back here. Not a very aerodynamic shape. But the contour feathers give the bird its aerodynamic shape. They flesh it out. Not flesh it out, they fill it out. So their job is to provide the shape. The flight feathers are the feathers on the wings. And they're usually long, and they're always asymmetrical. They're nice and rigid. And that's the flight surface. That's going to give us our lift. That's going to give us our thrust. It's going to thrust is pushing us forward. Lift is raising us off the ground. That's their job. Underneath the contour feathers, underneath the flight feathers, are often downy feathers, and they're kind of not in a strict structure. And baby birds are covered with them, and later they're Adult feathers will cover that. But they're usually about insulation, keep them warm. You know, you've probably had a down jacket at some time in your life. There's other highly specialized ones. These are little feathers called bristles. And if you have a cat, what would these be in your cat?
Whiskers.
Whiskers, yeah. And they serve the same function. They're sensory. Or, in this case, as insect-catching bird, they channel the insect into the mouth as it's flying. A lot of birds have decorative feathers for displays, and those are called phyloplumes, like whatever this silly thing is, where the males have this little tuft on its head. Feathers are reptile scales. They are highly modified reptile scales. And they start off looking like a scale, and then through the development, they become feathers. And as it develops, it has a little sheath around it that's later shed. And you can see them on baby birds. They're called pin feathers. And the feather is developing inside that sheath, and that sheath will be shed, and the feather will spread out. But keep in mind, bird feathers and non-avian reptile scales, snake scales, that's the same evolutionary piece of machinery. It's just birds do this with it, snakes do this with it. And by the way, your hair is also modified reptile, well, not reptile scale, modified amniote scale. Feathers get damaged, they wear out, and they need to be replaced. And that's called, when feathers are shed, that's called molting. Shedding a damaged feather, or for many reasons. And I looked at this wonderful picture. A flying bird is a precisely balanced piece of engineering, and as these flight feathers are wear out, they have to be shed so a new one can be grown, and they shed symmetrically. I have no idea how that's controlled. I think that's pretty impressive. Many birds have a juvenile, and your feathers are called your plumage. You've heard that word, plumage, right? Many birds have a juvenile plumage, different colors and patterns, and an adult plumage, and they will shed these and molt into this. Many birds are really colorful. And the part of the bird we usually see is the feathers. So feathers are colors in the feathers. Colors come in. There's two ways to get color. One is the feather itself can have pigments laid down in it. As it grows, like red hair, blonde hair, the keratin is imbued with color. And so those feathers are blue. These ones are green. There's green pigments in there. Some birds, however, these feathers are not blue. They're reflecting blue light. And so, for example, in a lot of birds, look at this. There's just difference in light. You get two different colors. You know how you get a glass prism and it breaks up the wavelengths of light? Well, the pattern of the barbs on the feathers is like a prism, and it reflects red light out. That's why that looks red. Not because the feathers are red, not because they have red pigment in them, but because the structure, the physics, is projecting red light. So you can, I don't know if you've ever noticed, sometimes you were watching a bird and suddenly the color changes. And that's because the light's hitting it from a different angle. Those are called structural colors. So some colors are pigments. Oh, I don't have slides that says pigments. Some colors are pigments, like blonde and red. Some it's the physics, the way the light's reflected. That's why some birds, when they get wet, their colors disappear. Because the feathers the structure of the feathers is kind of lumpy when they're wet until they dry out. It's not reflecting the color it should. A bird skeleton is a good place to go to see some of the stuff I've been talking about, the hyper-specialization towards flight. And if we compare the skeleton of a bird to the skeleton of an alligator or a lizard, another reptile or mammal for that matter, we see a tremendous number of differences. And most of those differences have to do with flying. Putting power where you need it, like the keel, or lessening the weight. The heavier you are, the more expensive it is to fly. So some of the skeletal specializations. We have some bird skeletons. We'll get them out in the lab. Have a look at them one day. We're running out of labs, aren't we? One way to focus on what birds have done is to compare a modern bird with Archaeopteryx. And we've got some beautiful Archaeopteryx full skeletons, so we can reconstruct that creature. And this slide here shows all the differences. Well, not all of them, many of them, and I'll just point out a few of them in these upcoming slides. What we see if we compare Archaeopteryx to a modern bird, when we look at the skeleton, we see a lot of bone deletions. That's just what it sounds like. Bones are gone. They don't develop. We see a lot of bone fusions in what in Archaeopteryx is two bones. Well, in a bird, those two bones are fused together in a more lightweight construction. And we see a lot of bone simplification. What is a big, complex bone in Archaeopteryx is a little flat bone in a bird. And all these things here, streamline the structure, and they lower the weight. And we're moving towards flying and being really good at flying. And I think an interesting parallel here is the better we get at flying, that's the word I want here. The better you are at flying, the less able you are at other things. Birds can't pick things up with their hands, right? Because they don't have fingers. They've sacrificed fingers for very efficient wings. Archaeopteryx can still probably grab things with its fingers. So as you specialize yourself down in one direction, you lose abilities in others. So when we look at a bird's skull, for example, it's a diapsid skull. We'll get the skulls out today. But it's extensively modified with loss and fusion and simplification. I just have some examples here as we go along. Loss. We already touched upon this. Birds don't have teeth. So all the support structure for teeth and teeth themselves gone. That's a tremendous weight savings. And heavy jaws needed to support those teeth, not there anymore. That narrows our diet. We can't grab, large dinosaurs and tear them apart anymore. There's Archaeopteryx. Heavy jaws, full of teeth. What birds do instead is the beak. Lightweight, but I've been bitten by raptors. It's not fun. It's pretty sharp, and if you're a gopher, it'll take you apart. Look at the temporal region. We spent a lot of time with the temporal region of amniotes. We have those foramina. Well, the temporal region of bird skull is highly simplified. If we compare it to Archaeopteryx, there's a lot going on back there compared to a bird. Does its job, but in a much simpler, more lightweight construction. Fusion of elements, and the wing is a good place to go. In Archaeopteryx, we'll call it an arm. By get time of bird, we're going to call it a wing. And what you see here, this is the wrist and the hand. There's the forearm, there's the upper arm. So that's the wrist and the hand, and we see a whole bunch of elements fused together there into a construction that's all about supporting the flight feathers. It's not about grabbing things anymore. It does one thing and does it really well. So, skeletal specialization, modern features. There's that comparison there. Let's see where we go. Did that. Okay, here's some things that birds do. Different than some of the ancient ones. Pneumaticized bones. Pneumo, that pneumatic, that makes you think air spaces, right? Air pipes, pneumatic. This is a slice through a bird, probably a femur. Bird bones are hollow. And they're fairly strong because of all these support structures in them, kind of like the wing of an airplane. You want that to be lightweight but strong and have these structures in there to strengthen it. So, hollow bones, and the pneumaticized, those spaces in the long bones have air sacs in them, which we met earlier when we talked about dinosaurs. So it lessens the density of that construction. Still strong, but much less dense. For aerodynamics, we start to see the body jerked around, and the center of mass, the major portion of the weight of the bird, is shifted downward, away from the shoulders and the head, down towards the body. And this is for better aerodynamics, better weight balancing. When you're supporting that weight on a wing here, this is where you want it, not above it, but below it. The backbone and the rib cage are rigid in birds. The neck is flexible, but the backbone and the vertebrae are rigid. That's where the wings are anchored, and as they flap, the thrust and the lift that they're generating has to be transferred to the rest of the body, and it's done through the vertebral column, which in birds is rigid. Right? You can do that. Birds can't. So we see fused vertebrae along the length of the backbone. We see them fused into the pelvic girdle as well. Another thing we see, these are the ribs. You gotta look at the big, beautiful keel on the sternum here. Here's the ribs. The ribs have these little processes, these little wings on them. They're called uncinate processes, and they link the ribs together. So we're strengthening the backbone. We're also strengthening the rib cage there. It's a more robust, solid foundation. The wings would be mounted up here. Oh, well, there we go. Same slide. Point here. There's the keel. And the flight muscles insert on there. So we've got a big surface area for those flight muscles to insert. That's the sternum again. Your sternum's flat. The furcula, which again is the wishbone, gets well developed. The furcula shows up early in theropod dinosaurs. Tyrannosaurus rex had a furcula, a wishbone. But in birds, it's this structure I said earlier, it's like a spring. And when the wings flap, that furcula pushes them back out. That becomes an important issue with flying, an important structure for flying. Oh, there it is there, showing kind of that. There's where the wings would insert here, and that wishbone would be compressed alternatively. Oh, that's actually the best shot of it. I forgot I had this slide. There's the wing, and there's that furcula. There it is. Beat that, yeah. Did that. So, compared to a modern bird, Archaeopteryx has all this old-fashioned stuff. Teeth, we have solid bones, let's say non-pneumaticized bones, no keel. The furcula's there, but it's not as well developed. Fingers, more of a dinosaur skeleton. Let's look at bird limbs. We'll start with the wings. We're not going to call them arms anymore. We're going to call them wings. Did that. So there's some example of bird wings. Again, this is the upper arm, the humerus. There's the radius and the ulna, just like in you, two lower arms. And these are wrist bones and fingers, highly modified wrist bones and fingers. And the flight feathers will be coming off these. And there's that joint right there, that flexible joint. So if you compare it to your arm as a mammal, there's the comparison there. The bones are there. It's just until you get to the hand, the wrist and the hand. And then there's a lot of fusion and a lot of loss. Your wrist and hand is about grasping things and manipulating things. Their wrist and hand is about lift, generating lift as that wing flaps. And just for comparison, there's the other flying vertebrates. There's the extinct pterosaur, a bat, and a bird. 3 different ways to get lift from flapping your arms Three different evolutionary solutions there. And I think I made this point earlier, but here's a slide on it. When you specialize a structure so extensively to do one thing, it loses functionality for almost anything else. And so bird wings are about flying and not much else. They don't manipulate food with them. They don't grab things with them. They're about flying. Kind of a general evolutionary principle. The more specialized a structure gets, the more narrow its function becomes too. So they don't use their wings for much other than flying or displays. So that leaves the other structures they have for interacting with their environment. Their beak and the talons. That's how they interact with their environment. Capturing food, manipulating food, grooming, things like that. What do bald eagles eat mostly?
Fish.
Fish, yeah. Fish, right there. Bald eagles are fish eaters, scavengers. They find dead things on beaches too, lakesides. No. Archaeopteryx has fingers on his hands and nails. There's only one bird that still has fingers, and it's a real strange thing. It's a creature from South America. I put the map in, I guess I did. A creature from South and Central America called a hoatzin, and it's an odd bird. There's a pair from right there. And the modern bird is a bird, but their babies, they live in trees, and their babies have claws on their fingers. Right there. That's really unusual. It's the only bird that ever has fingers. And they fall off as the baby matures. And it's just a little niche thing. They're living in dense vegetation. Little babies apparently need to be able to claw things. And so evolution has given them fingers. And my interpretation on this is the genetic information that controls fingers is still hiding in birds. It's just all those genes are turned off. And somehow, the ancestors of hoatzin, those finger genes got turned back on. And they're hideous. So the other thing we have is legs. Legs and feet. Again, there's comparing it to a human. We have the same bones again to some degree. We've got a femur, a knee, and then a lower leg, and then the foot. Now what you think of as the foot in the bird, well, that's the foot and the ankle. The ankle's really long there. And the lower leg, whereas in most vertebrates there's two bones there. They're on you, right? Let's see, femur, tibia, fibula. In birds, the smaller one, which is the fibula, is almost gone. It's almost gone. It's a little spike along the side there. So we see a lot of simplification there and loss. It's actually called it's actually a funny thing. It's called the tibiotarsus because it's the tibia with the tarsus is an ankle bone with an ankle bone fused to it. So, I'm going to make a point that popped out of my brain. Musculature. We'll just focus on flying. There's two muscles that are involved in flying. The supracoracoideus and pectoralis. You took anatomy classes, you might have run into those ones. We don't need to worry about that here. But we have one muscle to pull that humerus down, the downstroke, and then the other muscle pulls it back up with the spring and the furcula, the wishbone helping. And as you might guess, for a bird that flies, the downstroke is the important one. And that's the big breast muscle. That's the downstroke. And that's the power stroke. And then the other one pulls it back up. So these are highly developed muscles that don't fatigue easily. There's physiology in there that keeps them from fatiguing easily. A lot of oxygen delivered to them. A lot of blood flow delivered to them. And there you see the function of the keel. And that structure's flat. We don't have this big keel here. And these muscles in you are not nearly as well developed because it's not what you do all day long. In legs, there's a lot of weight saving going on in the leg, and the chicken foot, as it's called, the ankle and then the toes there. Look at how the muscle control gets down there. The muscles don't extend down there. You know, the skin around a chicken leg is very, very thin. Can you picture that? It's actually tendons running down there. So the muscles are in the upper and middle leg, or lower leg, and the effect gets transferred by those tendons. Okay, why is that slide there? Dark meat and light meat, right? When you get your turkey or your chicken, right? Some people like one, not the other. I can handle both. Dark meat, it's dark because it's muscle that's used a lot. And so it has certain blood pigments in them that store oxygen. You heard myoglobin? It's full of myoglobin. So it's dark. And light-colored muscle doesn't have that. Light-colored muscle is not used as much. And it's kind of funny in a chicken or a turkey because it's opposite of what it is in every other bird. The light-colored meat does not have the myoglobin, so it's not muscle that's used all the time. Because chickens and turkeys don't fly. They run and walk. In other birds, this would be the light meat. This would be the dark meat. Because this is the muscle, breast muscle. That's the muscle most birds use all the time. That would be the dark meat in most birds. And the legs they don't use as much. I think that's kind of an interesting little dichotomy there. Yeah, here's a turkey. And we've also bred turkeys to have huge, huge breasts. Because that's the meat we like. Okay, a couple more things and then, yeah, we'll take our first breath. Actually, let's do it right now. That's a good point. So, 4 or 5 minutes. Yeah, 5 minutes. Let's start again at 10 o'clock.